My name is Anna Clark. For most of my 34 years, I've considered my life a quiet study in contentment, a life built not on grand pronouncements, but on the steady accumulation of small, cherished moments. I grew up in a town in eastern Oregon that smelled of sagebrush and dry earth, a place where the sky was enormous and the community small. My parents were librarians, gentle souls who taught me that the richest worlds were often found between the covers of a book. It was a background that instilled in me a love for stories, for quiet observation, and for the deep, steady currents that run beneath the surface of things. It was this love for stories, I think, that led me to my work. I'm the program director for the Hearthstone Arts Collective, a small nonprofit in Portland dedicated to bringing arts education to underserved communities. It's not a job that makes you rich, but it fills a space in my soul that money never could. And it was in Portland, a city of misty rain, evergreen trees, and handcrafted everything, that I met Leo. Our home is a modest craftsman bungalow in the Laurelhurst neighborhood, with a deep front porch where we drink coffee and listen to the rain drumming on the roof. Leo Vance is a man who moves through the world with a quiet confidence that I have always found profoundly reassuring. He's a landscape architect with Green Canopy Designs, a firm that tries to weave nature back into the urban grid. His hands, which can coax blueprints into living, breathing parks, are the same hands that hold mine with such unwavering tenderness. We were 5 years married, and our life together felt like one of our city's well-tended gardens, peaceful, growing, and rooted in good soil. "Big day today," I said, sliding a ceramic mug of coffee across our worn oak table. The morning light was a soft, pearly gray, filtered through the enormous Douglas fir in our front yard. A classic Portland autumn morning. The grant proposal for the youth mural project is due. If we get it, we can fund the program for the next 3 years. Leo looked up from the schematics spread before him, his brow furrowed in concentration. He brushed a stray lock of sandy brown hair from his forehead and his gaze softened as it met mine. "You'll get it, Anna. No one is more passionate about that work than you are." He reached across the table, his fingers covering mine. "But you've been burning the candle at both ends. I can see it in your eyes. Are you remembering to breathe?" I smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through my chest. This was Leo. Always seeing, always caring. "I'll breathe when the application is uploaded," I teased gently. "It's been a push, but it's worth it. This project could change things for a lot of kids." His thumb traced a slow circle on the back of my hand. "I know. Just take care of yourself. Oh, speaking of which, Mom called yesterday. She wants to drop by on Sunday, bring over one of her shepherd's pies." My smile widened. "That sounds wonderful." Leo's mother, Eleanor, was a woman of formidable grace. A retired surgical nurse, she carried herself with an air of impeccable, almost intimidating, composure. She was always perfectly dressed, her silver hair styled in a flawless chignon, a subtle, expensive perfume trailing in her wake. She visited us twice a month, always bearing a casserole dish filled with some impossibly perfect comfort food. Her shepherd's pie was legendary, a culinary masterpiece I'd tried and failed to replicate many times. Her cooking is on another level, I mused, taking a sip of my coffee. It's like she has a secret ingredient I'm missing. 40 years of practice, Leo said with a laugh. Dad says he married her for her mashed potatoes and just got lucky with the rest. Leo's father, Arthur, was the quiet counterpoint to Eleanor's polished presence. A retired history professor, he was a man of comfortable sweaters and a gentle, absent-minded demeanor. He adored Leo and had always treated me with a warm, unassuming kindness. They were, by all accounts, the kind of in-laws people dream of. "We should have them over for a proper dinner soon," I said. "I feel like we're always on the receiving end of her generosity." "Don't worry about it," Leo said, already folding his schematics. "She loves doing it. It's how she shows she cares." He paused, his expression turning a little more serious. "She did ask, about grandchildren." The air shifted, just slightly. It was the one gentle pressure point in our otherwise seamless life. After 5 years, the question had begun to surface more frequently, a soft but persistent inquiry from friends and, most pointedly, from Eleanor. I know she's looking forward to it, I said softly. I appreciated that Leo always framed it as his mother's desire, not a demand on me. I look forward to it, too. I really do. It just feels like we need to get through this busy patch at work first, to be able to give a child the attention they deserve. Exactly, he said, his relief palpable. It's our timeline, Anna. Not hers. Not anyone else's. Mom will understand. He stood and came around the table to kiss the top of my head. The clock on the wall chimed 8. Time to face the day. Good luck with the grant, he said, grabbing his satchel. I'll pick up groceries for dinner tonight. You just focus on your big win. Thank you, I said, following him to the door. You too. Be safe on that site. He gave me one last, lingering kiss before stepping out into the damp morning. I watched from the doorway as he got into his car, the red tail lights disappearing into the misty street. Leaning against the door frame, I took a deep breath, the air cool and smelling of wet leaves and earth. My life was good. My marriage was strong, my work was meaningful, and I was surrounded by a loving family. I felt a profound sense of gratitude, a quiet, humming happiness that seemed to settle deep in my bones. I had no way of knowing that a slow, insidious poison was already beginning its silent work, or that the very foundation of this happiness was a carefully constructed lie. The first hint of dissonance arrived not with a crash, but with a whisper. It was about 3 months ago, as the last days of a surprisingly warm summer were bleeding into the cool embrace of autumn. I remember waking up one morning feeling as though I were moving through water. A profound fatigue had settled into my limbs, a heavy, waterlogged blanket that no amount of coffee could lift. At first, I dismissed it as burnout. The grant cycle at Hearthstone had been particularly demanding, and I'd been working long hours, fueled by caffeine and a sense of mission. You're just tired, I told myself. You need a weekend of doing absolutely nothing. But the weekend came and went, and the exhaustion remained. In fact, it deepened. Getting out of bed in the morning became a monumental act of will. By mid-afternoon, a thick fog would descend upon my mind, making it difficult to focus on grant reports or even follow conversations in meetings. My colleagues, a compassionate and close-knit group, started to notice. Anna, are you all right? Maya, our outreach coordinator, asked one afternoon, her brow creased with concern. You seem distant. Leo noticed, too. He started taking on more of the household chores without my asking, his quiet acts of service a testament to his worry. You've barely touched your dinner, he'd say, his eyes searching mine for an explanation I didn't have. It's probably just the change of seasons, I'd reply, forcing a smile that felt brittle and thin. I'll book a doctor's appointment if it doesn't let up soon. But the fatigue wasn't the only symptom. My menstrual cycle, once as predictable as the tides, became erratic. A month would pass, then 2, with nothing. I reasoned it away as a hormonal fluctuation, another symptom of stress. A woman's body is a delicate ecosystem, I told myself, easily thrown off balance. Finally, in late October, I made an appointment with a gynecologist, a well-regarded doctor in a calm, modern clinic downtown. After a thorough examination and a battery of tests, she sat across from me in her office, a reassuring smile on her face. Well, Anna, I don't see any glaring issues, she said, reviewing the results on her monitor. Your hormone levels are all within the normal range. No signs of any physical abnormalities. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. Have you been under a significant amount of stress lately? I told her about the pressures at work, the long hours. But I've been through busy periods before, I added, a note of frustration in my voice. It's never felt like this. The body changes as we age, she explained kindly. The same amount of stress can have a more pronounced impact. For now, let's focus on lifestyle adjustments. Prioritize sleep, ensure you're eating well-balanced meals, and perhaps try to scale back your workload for a bit. Let's see how you feel in a month. I took her advice to heart. I spoke with my director at Hearthstone, who was wonderfully understanding and helped me delegate a few of my responsibilities. I started leaving the office at 5, made a conscious effort to cook nutritious meals, and was in bed by 10 every night. Leo was my rock, my quiet champion. Let me handle that, he'd say, taking a basket of laundry from my hands. His unwavering support was the one solid thing in a world that was beginning to feel unsteady. Eleanor's concern also intensified. Her bi-monthly visits became weekly. She'd arrive with a Pyrex dish of something hearty and a thermos of what she called her grandmother's restorative tonic. "You're working far too hard, dear," she'd say, her voice a smooth blend of sympathy and gentle admonishment. A young woman needs to protect her vitality. The tonic was an herbal tea, a dark, earthy brew with a slightly bitter aftertaste. "It's an old family recipe," she explained, pouring me a steaming cup. "Chamomile, valerian root, and a few other things. Marvelous for fatigue." I drank it dutifully. It did seem to warm me from the inside out, and I wanted to be appreciative of her efforts. "Thank you, Eleanor. You're so thoughtful." "We're family, Anna," she'd reply, her smile perfectly maternal. "Your health is our health." But a month passed, and I felt no better. In fact, new symptoms began to appear. I started experiencing bouts of dizziness, moments where the room would tilt and sway. A low-grade nausea became my constant companion. This wasn't just stress. A cold knot of anxiety began to tighten in my stomach. I returned to the gynecologist. More tests were run, all coming back as stubbornly normal as the first set. "Have you considered you might be pregnant?" she asked. "I took a home test," I said, shaking my head. It was negative. "And with my periods being so irregular." "I see," she said, her expression thoughtful. "In that case, I think it's time we looked beyond my specialty. I'd recommend a full workup with an internist. Let's make sure we're not missing something systemic." The not knowing was the worst part. It was a gnawing uncertainty that colored every aspect of my life. My performance at work was suffering, and I was consumed with guilt. I'd lie awake at night, my mind racing through a terrifying catalog of possibilities, each more frightening than the last. Seeing my distress, Leo finally made a suggestion. "Anna, why don't we go see my brother? Julian can get you in right away." Leo's older brother, Dr. Julian Vance, was the chief of internal medicine at one of Portland's largest hospitals. He was a brilliant diagnostician, the doctor other doctors consulted on their most baffling cases. "Oh, Leo, I don't want to impose," I hesitated. "It's not imposing. We're family," he insisted, his voice firm with conviction. "He's worried about you. He can run more comprehensive tests than a small clinic. Please, Anna, let's just get some answers." I finally agreed. The idea of a definitive diagnosis, even a bad one, felt preferable to this limbo of fear and uncertainty. When Leo called him, Julian was immediately accommodating. "Of course, bring her in," he'd said, his voice calm and authoritative over the phone. "Don't you worry, Anna. We'll get to the bottom of this." His confidence was a balm to my frayed nerves. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. The morning of the examination, I woke with a churning mix of anxiety and anticipation. This could be the day the mystery of my body's rebellion was finally solved. Leo held my hand the entire drive to the hospital, a silent, steady presence beside me. "It's going to be okay," he said, squeezing my fingers as we pulled into the vast parking garage. "Julian is the best." The hospital's main atrium was a soaring space of glass and steel, buzzing with a low hum of activity. The air smelled of antiseptic and floor polish, a scent that always made my stomach clench. A kind nurse guided us through a labyrinth of white corridors to the internal medicine wing. Julian's office was large and lined with medical texts, but a collection of framed family photos on his desk of him with his wife and 2 young daughters, of him and Leo as boys, softened the clinical atmosphere. He stood as we entered, a taller, more serious version of Leo, his eyes filled with a kind concern. "Anna, good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "Leo's told me the basics. Walk me through everything from the very beginning." I recounted the last 3 months in detail, the crushing fatigue, the erratic cycles, the dizziness, the nausea. I told him about the clear results from the gynecologist. He listened intently, nodding and taking meticulous notes, his sharp gaze missing nothing. He murmured when I'd finished. "A constellation of nonspecific symptoms. Tricky. We're going to be thorough today. Full blood and urine panels, an ultrasound, and I'd also like to get a CT scan of your abdomen. A CT scan? I asked, a flicker of alarm rising. Just to be prudent, he said, his tone reassuring. I want a clear picture of all your internal organs. Rule everything out. It's a standard diagnostic tool, nothing to be frightened of. The next few hours were a blur of sterile rooms and quiet-spoken technicians. Blood was drawn, samples were given. The ultrasound was blessedly familiar. Then came the CT scan. I changed into a thin hospital gown and lay on the narrow bed that slid into the great white ring of the machine. A technician injected contrast dye into my arm, a strange warmth flushing through my veins. Okay, Anna, I'll need you to hold your breath now, a voice instructed over an intercom. The machine whirred to life. I closed my eyes, praying for an answer, any answer. When it was over, I sat up, watching as the technician began to review the images scrolling across a large monitor. How does it look? I asked, my voice small in the quiet room. The technician didn't answer right away. He was leaning closer to the screen, his brow furrowed. He used the mouse to zoom in on one area, then another, toggling between different views. His casual professional demeanor had vanished, replaced by a tense focus. Please wait here a moment, he said, his voice suddenly formal. He stood abruptly and left the room. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. He saw something. Something was wrong. A few minutes later, he returned with an older woman, presumably his supervisor. They stood together, pointing at the screen and speaking in hushed, urgent tones. I could only catch fragments. Not artifacts, multiple densities. Contact Dr. Vance immediately. The supervisor looked over at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and pity. Dr. Vance will be down to speak with you shortly, she said. Please, just try to relax. Relax? The word was a cruel joke. I quickly changed back into my clothes and met a waiting Leo in the hallway, my hands trembling as I recounted the strange behavior of the technicians. They found something, Leo. The way they were acting. He wrapped his arms around me. Whatever it is, we'll face it. Together. Just then, Julian appeared at the end of the hall, walking towards us at a brisk pace. His face was a mask of grim tension. Anna, he said, his voice low and strained. I need to speak with you in my office. Alone. Alone? Leo asked, his hand tightening on my arm. Julian, what is it? Leo, please. I need to talk to Anna first, Julian said, his gaze unwavering. It wasn't a request. I promise I'll explain everything to you in a moment. Numbly, I followed my brother-in-law back to his office. My legs felt disconnected from my body. He closed the door firmly behind us and gestured for me to sit. Anna, he began, his voice heavy with a gravity I had never heard from him before. What I am about to show you is deeply disturbing. He turned his laptop towards me. On the screen were the black and white images from my CT scan. He used the mouse to point to a series of small, bright white specks, scattered like malevolent stars across the dark landscape of my abdomen. What are those? I whispered, my throat tight. Julian took a deep, shaky breath. They're foreign bodies, Anna. Tiny man-made objects. Dozens of them. Lodged in the lining of your stomach and intestines. The room seemed to tilt. Foreign bodies? I don't understand. How? He clicked to another image, a magnified 3D reconstruction. Now I could see them clearly, minuscule, pill-like capsules. These were not accidentally ingested, Julian continued, his voice barely a whisper. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a terrible, dawning horror. These were put there. Deliberately. Over a sustained period of time. The blood drained from my face. The sound in the room faded to a dull roar in my ears. Deliberately? Someone has been feeding you these, Anna, he said, his professional composure finally cracking. And they're filled with a toxic chemical compound. They're the reason you've been so sick. He stood up, pacing the small space behind his desk. He ran a hand through his hair, his face pale. This isn't a medical condition. This is a crime. He finally stopped and looked at me, his expression one of profound sorrow and rage. Anna, someone is poisoning you. Poison. The word hung in the air, a monstrous, impossible thing. It didn't compute. My mind, which had been bracing for a diagnosis of some rare disease or autoimmune disorder, couldn't grasp the sheer malice of it. Poison. We have to call the police, Julian was saying, already reaching for his phone. Right now. This is attempted murder. A violent tremor seized my body. Who? The question screamed through the silent chaos of my mind. I had no enemies. My life was quiet, small, peaceful. Who would want to harm me? The police will investigate everyone, Julian said, as if reading my thoughts while he spoke into the phone. Anyone you've had regular contact with. Anyone who prepares food or drink for you. A slideshow of faces flashed through my mind. My colleagues at Hearthstone, my few close friends, Arthur and Eleanor. Eleanor, with her weekly visits, her perfectly crafted meals, and her special, bitter-tasting herbal tea. A cold, sick dread began to unspool in the pit of my stomach. It couldn't be. Not kind, caring Eleanor. The thought was so monstrous, so utterly unthinkable, that I pushed it away. It had to be a mistake. 2 detectives from the Portland Police Bureau arrived within the hour. They met us in Julian's office, their presence transforming the space from a medical consultation room into a crime scene. The older one, Detective Miller, had weary, compassionate eyes. His younger partner, Detective Chin, was sharp and observant, a small notebook already in her hand. Mrs. Vance, Detective Miller began gently, using Leo's last name, which I hadn't taken. I corrected him quietly. Miss Clark. I'm so sorry you're going through this. Dr. Vance has given us the overview. We understand you'll be heading into surgery shortly to have the objects removed. Surgery. The reality of the situation was crashing down in waves. These things, these capsules of poison, were inside me, and they had to be cut out. Leo, who had since been briefed by a distraught Julian, stood beside my chair, his hand a permanent, protective fixture on my shoulder. His face was a thunderous mask of disbelief and rage. How long will the surgery take? He asked Julian, his voice rough. It's a laparoscopic procedure, Julian explained. Minimally invasive. We'll go in with a camera and specialized tools to locate and extract each capsule. Based on the scans, I'd estimate about 3 hours. While the surgical team prepped, the detectives began their initial interview. They asked me to walk them through my life over the past few months, my routines, my relationships. In the last 3 months, Ms. Clark, who has regularly prepared food or drink for you? Detective Chin asked, her pen poised. I tried to think clearly through the fog of shock. My husband, Leo. I cook for us most nights. We occasionally eat out. I have lunch with my colleagues sometimes, and my mother-in-law, Eleanor. She visits on Sundays. She brings food. Detective Miller leaned forward slightly. Tell us about your mother-in-law. Eleanor. The name felt strange on my lips. She's very kind. She's a retired nurse. She's been so worried about me, bringing over meals and a special herbal tea she makes. The detectives exchanged a look so brief it was almost imperceptible. Tell us more about this tea, Chin said. She calls it her grandmother's tonic, I explained, my voice trembling slightly. She said it was for fatigue. She started bringing it around the time I first started feeling unwell. I saw a flicker of something in Leo's eyes. A dawning horror that mirrored my own. His mother. The timing was too perfect. But the mind rebels against such betrayals. It seemed more plausible that a stranger had been breaking into our house than to believe this of Eleanor. The surgery took place that afternoon. I surrendered to the oblivion of general anesthesia, a temporary escape from the waking nightmare. While I was under, Julian and his team painstakingly removed a total of 15 tiny capsules from the lining of my digestive tract. They were immediately handed over to the police for forensic analysis. A preliminary report came back before I was even fully awake. The findings were chilling. These are sophisticated, the forensic specialist explained to the detectives, a conversation they later relayed to us. Custom-made capsules designed to dissolve slowly, releasing their contents over time. The chemical compound inside is a complex, non-lethal poison. It's designed not to kill quickly, but to systematically degrade bodily functions, specifically reproductive health. Long-term exposure would lead to irreversible infertility and eventual organ failure. Whoever made this had significant medical or chemical knowledge. I heard this news from my hospital bed, the words washing over me in a tide of nausea. A poison that causes infertility. It wasn't just an attack on my life, it was an attack on my future, on the family Leo and I dreamed of building. 3 days later, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying certainty. Detective Miller and Detective Chin came to my hospital room. Leo was sitting by my bed, holding my hand. "Ms. Clark, we executed a search warrant on your in-laws' home this morning," Detective Miller said, his voice somber. In a small evidence bag, he held up a jar containing a familiar-looking dark, leafy mixture. "We found a large quantity of this herbal tea in the kitchen pantry. We also found several vials of the primary chemical agent hidden in a locked box in her closet. It matches the substance in the capsules we removed from you." The air left my lungs. It was true. "We also found her journals," Chin added softly. Leo let out a choked sound, a mix of a sob and a gasp. "Her journals. She kept meticulous records," Miller said, his expression grim. "It's all in there, Ms. Clark. Her resentment of you, dating back to the day you and Leo were married. She felt you weren't of the right background for her son. That your family wasn't established, that your career was frivolous. The fact that you hadn't produced a grandchild after 5 years was, in her mind, the final confirmation of your unsuitability. It was the justification she used to escalate her plan." The words were like blows. The warm smiles, the concerned questions, the lovingly prepared meals, all of it had been a performance. A 5-year-long act of deception, masking a hatred so profound it had curdled into a methodical, murderous plot. "But why?" I whispered, tears finally breaking free and streaming down my face. "What did I do?" "You did nothing, Anna," Leo said, his voice thick with tears. "Nothing. My God. My own mother." He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "According to her journals, she began administering the poison 3 months ago, dissolving the contents of a capsule in the thermos of tea she brought you each week," Miller continued. "She was a nurse. She knew how to create a slow-acting poison that would mimic the symptoms of stress or a hormonal imbalance, something that wouldn't raise immediate red flags with a doctor. It was a calculated, patient cruelty. I remembered her visits, how she'd always insist I finish the entire cup while she was there, watching me with what I had mistaken for maternal affection. It was, I now realized, the cold observation of a scientist monitoring an experiment. Eleanor Vance has been arrested, Detective Chin stated. She is being charged with aggravated assault and attempted murder." The room fell silent, filled only with the sound of my husband's weeping and the frantic, broken rhythm of my own heart. The family I thought I had, the warmth I believed I'd been welcomed into, had been an illusion. Beneath the placid surface of Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings, a dark and toxic current had been flowing all along, aimed directly at me. My body would heal, Julian had assured me. But the wound of this betrayal felt impossibly, terrifyingly deep. I wasn't sure that part of me would ever recover. A year is both a lifetime and the blink of an eye. It's long enough for physical wounds to scar over, for poisons to be purged from the bloodstream, and for a new, fragile sense of normal to take root. I was back in Julian's office for a follow-up, but this time, the room was filled not with fear, but with a quiet, miraculous joy. On the large monitor, a grainy black and white image showed the unmistakable, flickering heartbeat of our baby. "Everything looks perfect, Anna," Julian said, his smile genuine and warm. "You're well into your 2nd trimester. The baby is strong and healthy." Leo stood beside me, his hand resting on my arm, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you, Julian," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Eleanor's trial had concluded 6 months earlier. The journals, with their cold, detailed entries, had sealed her fate. She was sentenced to 15 years in a state penitentiary. Throughout the proceedings, she remained unrepentant, her composure never cracking. Her final statement to the court was a chilling glimpse into her warped reality. "I only ever wanted what was best for my son," she'd said, her voice clear and steady. He deserved a wife from a family of substance, a woman who understood her duties. She never looked at me, or at Leo. It was as if we were merely actors in a play of her own devising. Leo had severed all contact. He wrote her one letter, a single page filled with his grief and his fury, and then he closed that door forever. "The woman who raised me is gone," he told me one night, his voice hollow. "And the person left in her place is a stranger I never want to know." Arthur, my gentle father-in-law, was devastated. He was a man adrift, shattered by his wife's monstrous deception and his own unwitting blindness to it. He came to our house a week after the sentencing, his shoulders slumped, his kind face aged by sorrow. "Anna," he'd said, tears welling in his eyes. "There are no words. I'm so sorry. I lived beside her for 40 years and I never saw it. The bitterness. The hate. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry." There was no blame in my heart for Arthur. He was a victim, too, in his own way. "It's not your fault, Arthur," I told him, and I meant it. She fooled all of us. Slowly, carefully, we began to build a new kind of family with him, one based not on shared history, but on a shared, painful truth. He was tentative at first, terrified of overstepping, but the news of my pregnancy had been a lifeline for him. The prospect of being a grandfather had ignited a small, hopeful light in his sad eyes. On the drive home from the hospital, Leo and I were quiet. The late spring sun cast long shadows across the road, and the city was bursting with the vibrant green of new life. "I still think about it sometimes," I said softly, looking out at the passing trees. "The betrayal. It feels like a phantom limb, an ache where something used to be." "I know," Leo said, reaching over to take my hand. "What she did will always be a part of our story. But it's not the whole story, Anna. It's not even the most important part." He squeezed my hand. "It almost broke us, but it didn't. It made us, this." He gestured between the two of us, a small, profound motion. I smiled, a real, unburdened smile. He was right. We had walked through fire and emerged on the other side, not unscathed, but forged into something stronger. We had learned the hardest of lessons about the nature of family. It isn't about blood or obligation. It isn't about appearances or fulfilling expectations. True family is a conscious choice. It's the active, daily practice of respect, of love, of choosing to see and cherish a person for who they are, not who you want them to be. That evening, I stood in the nursery we had painted a soft, sunny yellow. A small crib stood in the corner, and a mobile of handcrafted felt birds hung from the ceiling, waiting for a tiny hand to set them spinning. I placed my own hands on my swelling belly, feeling the faint, fluttering movement within. The terror of the past year was a ghost, a shadow that no longer had the power to chill me to the bone. Its lessons, however, were etched into my soul. I had learned to trust my own intuition, that quiet inner voice that had whispered of the bitterness in the tea, the hollowness behind the perfect smile. I had learned to establish boundaries, to understand that kindness without genuine respect is a currency with no value. And I had learned that my worth was not tied to my background, my career, or my ability to produce a child on someone else's schedule. My worth was inherent. It was mine. Leo came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. We stood there together, watching the last rays of the sunset paint the sky in hues of rose and gold. "It's going to be okay," I whispered, as much to myself as to the new life I carried. "You are so loved. You are coming into a family built on truth. We'll be the best parents we can be," Leo murmured into my hair. "We'll teach this little one what family really means." Our future stretched before us, a landscape still marked by the scars of the past, but illuminated by a bright, hard-won hope. The bonds that tie us are not forged in shared houses or by shared names, but in the shared sanctuary of hearts that choose, again and again, to love with honesty, to forgive with grace, and to build a home on the solid ground of respect. And in that quiet, sun-drenched room, with my husband's arms around me and our child growing safely within, I knew that we had finally, truly, come home.